Now, we had seen an example yesterday of a function which does not have a Fourier transform. We saw that if you have an exponentially growing signal, it cannot be evaluated. The Fourier transform does not converge for any frequency. Okay. So, what I meant was that if you took, say, x of t equal to e raised to the power 2t ut, which means it is of this form. For t equal to 0 onwards, it grows exponentially. This integral will never converge. So, naturally, some of the advantages, ut is the unit step function, yes, ut is unit step. By the way, please feel free to stop me and ask me any question in between, do not wait till the end, yes. So, as we go in between, you must ask me questions. If something is not clear, stop me at that point, yes. So, you see, naturally, we are curious whether some of the advantages that we had, we saw that the Fourier transform gives you several advantages. It gives you the advantage of dealing with the input-output relation between in a linear shift invariant system very conveniently. The system is linear and shift invariant, and yesterday we also talked about the physical meaning of linearity and shift invariance. See, we often teach these things in typical engineering courses or in a signals and systems course without reflecting on what physical significance these ideas have. Yesterday we talked about it briefly, right? What is the meaning of linearity and shift invariance? Linearity again has two parts in it, additivity and homogeneity. What significance do these three things have? Additivity, homogeneity and shift invariance. We had talked about it yesterday, and briefly remember, additivity means what happens when you combine two inputs in terms of their effects. Homogeneity means what happens when you scale up an input, does the output scale accordingly? Now, these are of course very important questions physically. If I multiply an input by 2, would the output also be multiplied by 2 or not? And any other constant. And finally, shift invariance means that the system behavior does not change in time. That is what shift invariance means, some steadiness that we can expect out of the way the system behaves in time. So, these are reasonable assumptions to make about a system for an interval where these properties are likely to last. Now, when you say interval, the system is likely to exhibit linearity in a certain interval of amplitude. Linearity in terms of additivity and homogeneity are expected to be true often in a certain range of amplitudes. So, for example, if you look at some of these devices like an operational amplifier or a transistor or even resistors, capacitors, they would behave linearly in a certain range of voltage and current amplitudes. If you apply kilovolts to some capacitors, they might just explode. But if you apply a few volts, and as long as all your quantities are within a few volts, then linearity is going to be obeyed, right? The same thing holds for many mechanical systems or hydraulic systems, whatever. So, linearity is often obeyed in a certain range of operation, range of amplitudes, and shift invariance is often obeyed again on a certain range of time scales. So, we expect the system to maintain its properties in a certain interval, in a certain range of time scales. It may not be true forever, right? Now, to take an example, if you look at a resistance, the resistance maintains its value as long as the resistance material does not corrode or does not oxidize, right? And the same thing is true of a capacitance. As long as the capacitance, the material properties of the capacitance don't change, its capacitance value would remain. But if you take time scales where you expect the material properties to change, then the values might change. So, shift invariance is always true in a certain scale, in a certain time scale of operation. I want to emphasize this point because in most system theory discussions, we must be clear that linearity and shift invariance is often true in a certain range, either of amplitudes or time scales. Now, that remark apart, we had omitted two properties yesterday. We had talked about linearity and shift invariance, but we had omitted two properties, and we will bring those two properties first today. The property of causality and the property of stability. Let us take the property of causality first. Now, the word causality refers to obeying the cause-effect relationship. And what do you mean by obeying a cause-effect relationship? Well, the effect should not come before the cause. That means, if you see two inputs that are identical up to a certain point in time or up to a certain value of the independent variable, the output should also continue to be identical up to that point on the independent variable. So, suppose the independent variable is time. Then, given that x1t is equal to x2t for all t less than equal to t0, then a causal system would produce corresponding outputs Let me explain this. You see, what we are saying is, let xt produce the output yt, right? X is a function of time, it is given as an input to a system and it produces an output yt. Now, you make two experiments on the system. In one experiment, you apply x1t as the input and get y1t as the output. In another experiment on the system, you apply x2t as the input and get y2t as the output. Now, as long as x1t and x2t are identical up to a certain point in time, in a causal system, the outputs are also going to be identical. Right? That is the definition of causality. You cannot distinguish between the outputs as long as the inputs are identical. The inputs might differ afterwards. So, the outputs can only differ after T0 then, not before T0. And this is true for every possible T0 like this. Right? That is what causality means.
Can there be systems which are not generally causal?
So, the question is, can you have non-causal systems? Yes, indeed, if you are not operating in real time. So, suppose you have recorded data and you are processing it offline, then the system need not be causal. Also, if the independent variable is not time, the independent variable could be space. So, it could be one dimensional space. In that case, you do not need causality. There is no, in fact, there is no causality there, because moving forward or backward is equally difficult or easy in space. Right? So, therefore, causality is meaningful only when you are dealing with real time operation. In real time operation, of course, we have to be causal, we have no choice. Now, causality is one property in addition. So, these are all independent properties. I must emphasize that again. Linearity, meaning even within linearity there are two properties, additivity and homogeneity. Additivity, homogeneity, shift invariance, these three properties, and now the next two properties, causality and finally stability. All of these are independent properties. Independent means a system can possess any subset of these and may not have the others. That means each property can either be present or absent. That means you have 2 raised to the power of 5 possibilities, 32 possibilities of systems. Now, let us finally take the property of stability. I am introducing these properties because in the transform that we are going to talk about today, namely the Laplace transform, the causality and stability of the system will also be evident from the nature of the Laplace transform. Now, stability in the sense that we are going to talk about is what is called bounded input, bounded output stability. It is often abbreviated by BIBO, bounded input, bounded output. Now, what is boundedness? First, let us understand. Boundedness. Now, boundedness is a property of a signal, not a system. Right? A signal is bounded. If and only if we can find a non-negative constant call it mx, which is finite, so non-negative finite constant. 0 less than equal to mx, strictly less than plus infinity, so that mod xt is less than equal to mx for all t. So, essentially I can find a bound on the magnitude of that signal of xt. Of course, this definition is well known. So, this is now, what does bounded input, bounded output stability mean? It means that if the input is bounded, the output is bounded. Now, what it does not mean is that if the input is unbounded, the output is unbounded. It does not mean that. Right? I have been giving this example every time I teach signals and systems. I am sure some of you might have even listened to this example before. I keep telling them that stable systems are like sane people, and unstable systems are like insane people. So, with a sane person, with a reasonable person, with a person who behaves properly, if you behave properly with the person is guaranteed to behave properly with you, right? So, a sane person behaves properly if you behave properly with him. But if you behave improperly with a sane person, what can happen? The person may behave properly, the person may not behave properly. Even with a sane person, if you behave insanely, if you behave unreasonably, the person might react. Also, if you go and slap a sane person, he might slap you back, isn't it? But on the other hand, he may not also. So, that cannot be said beforehand. But if you go to an insane person, and if you behave sanely, you are not guaranteed that the person will behave sanely. He may behave sanely, he may behave insanely. If you go to an insane person and behave insanely, again you are not guaranteed. He may behave sanely or he may behave insanely, isn't it? He might behave unreasonably. The only thing that you are guaranteed is that if the person is insane, there is at least one instance known when somebody behaved sanely with the person and the person behaved insanely with that person. Is that right? The insane, why do we say a person is insane? Because there are at least known instances when sane behavior with the person resulted in an insane response, an unreasonable response. Is that right? So this is exactly the case with stable and unstable systems. Why I am pointing this out is I keep pointing, whenever I teach a course on signal systems, or even when I have taken, so some of you, if you have heard me earlier in some of my lectures, I keep emphasizing this example, because while we give this definition of bounded input, bounded output, when we teach system theory and the maths behind system theory, we don't emphasize some of these nuances. So often students are prone to think that if I have an unstable system and if I give it an unbounded input, or if I give it a bounded input, it will necessarily produce an unbounded output. That is not true. You can't say. And similarly, if you give an unbounded input to a stable system, some people think that it will definitely produce an unbounded output. That is also not necessarily true. So it's if you have any confusion, think of the sane or a reasonable person and an unreasonable person, and many of your questions will be answered. Is that right? So stable systems are those where a bounded input produces a bounded output. That's why it's called BIBO, bounded input, bounded output. In fact, this notion of stability is one of the notions. There are other notions of stability too. There is what is called asymptotic stability. So asymptotic stability means if you perturb a system, you ask whether the system will go into a stable state or not. Those are also other notions of stability, by perturbation, behavior with perturbation, and they may not be equivalent to this notion. Some of them are equivalent, so there are equivalences also. But of course, we are talking about bounded input, bounded output stability. That's the kind of stability that we most often discuss in system theory, at least in engineering, right? Well, I wouldn't, that is also, I should take that with a pinch of salt. I mean, in a first description, we often take bounded input, bounded output. But in control systems, for example, people also talk about Lyapunov stability, which has to do with the trajectory that a system follows. Anyway, we are going to talk about bounded input, bounded out stability for this discussion today. Now again, stability is a property independent of causality and all the other three properties. So system may not have any of those properties. It may not be homogeneous, it may not be shift invariant, but it can be stable or it may not be stable. It can be causal, it may not be causal, right? So all these five properties are independent. That should be understood very clearly. Yesterday we saw that if you have a linear shift invariant system, then the sinusoid was a very beautiful input to give that system, provided the output was convergent. That is something that we just hid behind the carpet yesterday. We didn't see, for example, we wrote down the Fourier integral yesterday. The Fourier integral, for a stable system, in fact, for a stable system, if it is linear shift invariant also, then the impulse response definitely has a Fourier transform. In fact, we will prove that. So So in other words, a stable system which is also linear and shift invariant will always have a frequency response. That means if you give it, you see, why is this bounded input, bounded output property important? When you give, now, yesterday we were talking about sinusoids. We give a sinusoid as an input and we look at the output. And we reasoned out that for a linear shift invariant system, if you give a sinusoid as an input, it has no choice but to produce a sinusoid as an output. Of course, the amplitude and phase might change, and the reasoning we gave was because of linearity and shift invariance. Now, the only catch there was that all our argument was correct, except we were not guaranteed that the output amplitude might be finite. It can happen that the output amplitude diverges. In fact, now I'll tell you a story. You see, there was this case of some of the bridges on which soldiers used to march, So what people noticed was that if the soldiers just walked like ordinary passers-by, the bridge was stable. People used to walk in large crowds across the bridge and there was no trouble. But when the soldiers marched in rhythm, the bridge suddenly oscillated and collapsed. This has been observed. What is the idea behind this? The idea behind this is when the soldiers march in rhythm, you are giving a periodic input, the disturbance on the bridge is periodic or close to periodic. And using the Fourier series idea yesterday, if we decompose that periodic input into its sinusoidal components, then one of those sinusoidal components could result in an infinite response because of resonance. And then the bridge would oscillate with infinite amplitude oscillations and therefore it would collapse. That can happen. So, if you give a sine wave to a linear shift invariant system, the bridge can be thought of as a linear shift invariant system. Because the bridge responds to perturbations in a linear shift invariant manner. You don't expect the properties of the bridge to change, in time very much. But this is an example where a sinusoid might have, and of course, in a certain range of operation, you could think of the bridge as responding linearly. So, within those constraints, if you think of the bridge as having these resonant frequencies where giving that particular sinusoidal frequency as an input causes the bridge to create infinite oscillations, then you realize that the frequency response does not converge. That means the Fourier transform of the impulse response does not converge at those frequencies. So therefore, what we need to do today is to broaden our transform. Can we have a broader transform which allows stable and unstable systems? All right. Now, before we do that, we need to study a few things about linear shift invariant systems which have these two properties. So now we will confine ourselves. First we said that these are all independent properties. But now we will take linear shift invariant systems which are one by one. So first let us look at causal, that is easy. Now if a linear shift invariant system is causal, you see the impulse response characterizes the linear shift invariant system completely. So you can look at the impulse response and you should be able to say whether the system is causal or not. How should you, now what about the impulse response will tell you whether it is causal or not? Let us reason out. So we knew yesterday from our discussion that the output and input are related like this. The output is obtained by convolving the input. Many of you talked about this very nicely. Convolving the input with the impulse response. Isn't it? Now what does causality mean? The output at a particular time t should not require you to look at inputs after the time t. That means minus tau should not become positive. For minus tau being positive, the corresponding h tau should be 0. In other words, h tau is equal to 0 whenever minus tau is positive or tau is negative. So it is so simple. A linear shift invariant system is causal if and only if its impulse response is 0 all the way up to 0 and non-zero parts only occur after 0, at or after 0. Stability is a little more, I won't say difficult, but requires a little more reasoning. Now again, for a linear shift invariant system, yt is integral minus infinity to plus infinity h tau xt minus tau d tau. Now mod yt is clearly mod integral minus to plus infinity h tau xt minus tau d tau. Now when you take a modulus of a sum, it is always less than or equal to the sum of the moduli, and therefore the modulus of an integral also will be less than or equal to the integral of the modulus. So this is less than or equal to but then this can be written as mod h tau times mod x t minus tau d tau Now if xt is bounded, and let us say it is bounded by the quantity mx, then mod xt minus tau is less than or equal to mx, and therefore mod yt is less than or equal to mx times integral from minus to plus infinity mod h tau d tau. Is that right? So it is very clear that if this quantity, if integral mod h tau d tau is convergent, is finite, then mod yt converges, then mod yt is bounded, because it is less than or equal to a product of two finite quantities for all t. So we have a sufficient condition for stability here, right? Isn't it? It's a sufficient condition for stability, because if the impulse response is absolutely integrable, then the system has no choice but to be stable. In fact, if you look at it, why are you guaranteed that a stable system will always have a finite frequency response or will have a frequency response? Because giving a sinusoidal input to a stable system means you have given a bounded input to the system, and it has no choice but to produce a bounded output. And if it is a bounded output, the output has to be sinusoidal. Now of course, we can also prove this condition is necessary. I am not going into that proof, right? In fact, that proof is based on a principle of giving a nasty input to a system, which forces this condition to come out, but I won't go into that. I will just state that result without proof. So it turns out that this condition is also necessary. It's a necessary and sufficient condition for stability. the impulse response is absolutely integrable. That means integral minus to plus infinity mod h tau d tau is finite. Now, the reason why I brought this up is that I now want to be able to deal with unstable systems also. It is very clear that I cannot deal with unstable systems using the Fourier transform, because if the system is unstable, I do not even know that the output to a sinusoid converges. So, there is no point in using the Fourier transform there, right. In fact, let us understand a little more, about this whole idea of, see, yesterday we talked about the Fourier transform and why we use the Fourier transform. The Fourier transform is used because, if you make a linear shift invariant approximation to a system, or if you think of a system as behaving in a linear shift invariant manner, then the Fourier transform offers you a different perspective for dealing with the system. The input-output relationship can be found by using the Fourier transform. You can find the Fourier transform of the input if that is possible, and the Fourier transform of the output will be equal to the Fourier transform of the input multiplied by the Fourier transform of the impulse response. And in fact, the Fourier transform of the impulse response is called the frequency response of the system. The problem is, if the impulse response is not absolutely integrable, the frequency response will not exist. Is that right? So, how do we then deal with systems like this? We need to generalize that transform a little bit. So, generalization. Now, how do we generalize? Now, the idea is very simple. Again, here I like to, I am sharing with you some of the ways in which I introduce these ideas to a class. You can take them or leave them, but I find them useful. I introduce this idea of the Laplace transform by introducing the principle that we use to domesticate wild animals. So you see, some animals are easy to domesticate, isn't it? For example, the dog is not very difficult to domesticate. If you discipline a little bit, no problem, it does obey. Cow also is not too difficult to domesticate. So you can train the cow to behave properly. That's what, in fact, all in the past, why in the past, even today, we are so heavily dependent on domestication of so many animals. But if you want to domesticate a tiger, that's a bit difficult, isn't it? You can't do it in the same way as you domesticate a cow or a donkey. A donkey can be domesticated also without too much of difficulty. So, the tiger or maybe a lion, these could be slightly difficult to domesticate, isn't it? So, how would you then suppose you want to domesticate a tiger, what should you do? What principle will you apply? Let me ask you. Yes, she has an idea, yes. That is correct, yes. So, you need to confine the tiger to a cage first and then domesticate. After you put it in a cage, so it can't attack you, then you can teach it whatever you want, right? So, of course, you should not do harm to it, but you don't allow it to come and eat you up or something. So, then now the same principle can be applied to unstable systems. So, if I want to put a transform on unstable systems, I must first put their impulse response into a cage and then find a Fourier transform. Is that right? So, for example, let us take an unstable system which has impulse response. So, the example that we took some time ago, this function has no Fourier transform, isn't it? So, how will I build a transform on it? So, I must first put this into a cage. And how do I put it into a cage? I multiply it by another exponential. See, obviously you can see that this system is unstable. Why is it unstable? Because mod ht dt integrated over all t is not convergent, is divergent, isn't it? You cannot integrate, the absolute integral of mod e raised to the power 2t does not converge. So, it is an unstable system. Multiply it by another exponential. Let us call that exponential e raised to the power minus sigma t. And we have to choose sigma appropriately. So, e raised to the power 2t ut multiplied by e raised to the power minus sigma t. So, that becomes e raised to the power 2 minus sigma t ut. Okay. Now, you want to be able to find the Fourier transform of this. So, first you have to make it stable. When will this be stable? When this becomes absolutely integrable. So, e raised to the power 2 minus sigma t dt from 0 to infinity should converge. When will this happen? When 2 minus sigma is less than 0, isn't it? Or sigma is greater than 2. Otherwise, this will not. The cage has to be bigger than the tiger, otherwise, the tiger will escape. Isn't that right? Now, once you have multiplied by this exponential which decays, then you can find the Fourier transform. So, now you can find the Fourier transform of this. Now, we can obtain xt multiplied by ht multiplied by e raised to the power minus sigma t, and you can find the Fourier transform e raised to the power minus j omega t dt integrated over all t. That is the same as integral minus to plus infinity ht e raised to the power minus st, where s is equal to sigma plus j omega. Is that correct? If you denote the complex variable s as having a real part of sigma and imaginary part omega, then s equal to sigma plus j omega, and the integral that we have written is actually e raised to the power s minus st multiplied by ht dt. And for what region will this integral converge? When sigma is greater than 2 for this particular case. So, how does sigma greater than 2 look? See, S, how do you represent complex numbers? We represent complex numbers in a complex plane. So, we draw the complex plane of S. And sigma, now this is sigma and this is omega. So, sigma equal to 2. Sigma greater than 2, that means this region, isn't it? So, there is a certain region in the S plane where this integral converges, that is called the region of convergence. And in the region of convergence, we can evaluate this integral. for any point in the region of convergence. But this existence of the region of convergence is an important idea. Now this transform, this is also a transform. It's a transform from the signal as or the impulse response as written in the time domain to an impulse response as written in the complex plane. So it's the same quantity has been written in the complex plane. Now today in the afternoon, and we are going to have some groups talk about the inverse Fourier transform, isn't it? But let me help you. I'll do a little bit of work for you already. Let's talk about the inverse Fourier transform that we did not talk about yesterday. The Fourier transform and the inverse Fourier transform. Now, yesterday we talked about the Fourier transform. So the Fourier transform of x is defined, we talked about this yesterday, is it not? Integral xt e raised to the power minus j omega t dt. And we can represent this by capital X as a function of omega. This is how we represent it. Now, we explained the physical significance of this yesterday. This is what is the geometrical notion behind this? We had talked about it yesterday, isn't it? What is the geometrical notion behind this? This Fourier transform. What if you? Yes, you're trying to express xt as a combination. So what does this integral do actually? What if you think of xt as a vector? Right, what are we doing here? Yes? Into, yeah, you are finding what is the operation we are doing here, vector operation? It's an inner product. It's an inner product between xt and a rotating complex number, rotating with an angular velocity of omega. So it's essentially an inner product or dot product of xt with e raised to the power j omega t. And you know why you have to replace why you have to write e raised to the power minus j omega t, because if you have complex functions, the second argument has to be complex conjugated. We studied that yesterday. Why do we need to complex conjugate it? Because if I take the inner product of a vector with itself, it should give me a non-negative magnitude squared. So we discussed that yesterday, in the afternoon. Yes. So this is the Fourier transform. Now let us use our geometrical understanding to write down the inverse Fourier transform also. Now how do you reconstruct a vector from its components? Suppose you have a three-dimensional vector. How do you reconstruct a three-dimensional vector from its components? Suppose I tell you the components of the vector are say a, b and c. So how do you reconstruct the vector from its components?
We take dot product with the orthogonal, normal basis.
Yeah, yes, somebody else? Okay. So, you have a, b and c as the components. So what is the vector then? A times, a times a unit vector in that direction plus b times a unit vector in that direction plus c times a unit vector in the third direction, isn't it? So you just multiply each of the components by the corresponding unit vector and add them. That's how you reconstruct a vector from its components. The same principle can be carried here. So how do you reconstruct the function from its Fourier transform? Multiply each component by a unit vector in that direction and add over all the components, except that you require a factor of 2 pi here for normalization. This is the inverse Fourier transform. And this should give you back xt. You are multiplying the component by the corresponding unit vector in the direction that comes. For each omega there is a different component. Yes? So limit again is from minus to plus infinity, because all now, you need all the frequencies, all the continuous frequencies from minus to plus infinity. Because in general the function could be aperiodic. If it's aperiodic, the period tends to infinity. That's how you can understand it. Then you need all the frequencies. That means the fundamental frequency goes to 0. That means you need all the continuous frequencies, right from minus to plus infinity. you will see that these two expressions look very similar. In fact, we can make them look almost identical if we make a little change. We are dealing with the angular frequency here, but if we replace the angular frequency by the cycles per second frequency. So omega can be written as 2 pi f. So d omega becomes 2 pi df. F is the cycles per second frequency. Then you have exact symmetry. So capital X of omega is equal to the Fourier transform of small x of t and small x of t is the inverse Fourier transform of capital X. Now of course here capital X of omega, instead of omega you should write as a function of f. That writes a perfect symmetry between the two of them. And in fact, this is what you use when you talk about duality, and in the afternoon some of you are going to talk about duality, is that right? Group 5 is going to talk about duality today. What is duality? Duality is the fact that if you look at the Fourier transform and the inverse Fourier transform expression, they are almost the same except that you are inverting the sign, right? So, if you replace here in the second equation, if you replace t by f and f by t, so you interchange the roles of f and t. Let's write that. So let's write that. After all, the variable is yours to choose. When you write down an integral, you can always rename the variables. So small x of minus f will be capital X of t into e raised to the power minus j 2 pi f t dt. That means if small x of t has the Fourier transform capital X of f, then capital X of t has the Fourier transform small x of minus f. That is what it tells you. Is that correct? X of minus f should be capital X of t e raised to the power minus j 2 pi f t dt, isn't it? So I've interchanged the roles of f and t. I've interchanged the role of f and t. So where there was a df, now it's going to become a dt. I've exchange the roles of f and t. So I am just renaming the variables. See the same, the integral relationship does not change if I rename the variables. Now this is called the principle of duality, the Fourier transform. See, I always explain duality by saying that electrical engineers at least definitely, many other engineers are also quite lucky. So I say that they have to learn one thing and get one thing free. Here also you learn one Fourier transform, the other Fourier transform is free. Is that right? Actually, electrical engineers are very lucky. They have many kinds of dualities. Do you know of some other dualities? In network analysis also you have dualities. Then in Boolean algebra you have duality. Graph theory you have duality. And now in the Fourier transform also you have duality. So electrical engineers are lucky. And computer scientists also somewhat lucky. They have duality in their graph theory and Boolean algebra. Yeah. So, this whole, so this was the inverse Fourier transform. Now we have built a Laplace transform by first, see, what is a Laplace transform? It's the Fourier transform of a properly caged function. So you first cage the function and then find its Fourier transform. So you can of course construct an inverse Laplace transform in the same way. So you can find the inverse Fourier transform and then remove the cage, isn't it? So how do you find the inverse Laplace transform? So you have xt, you have multiplied xt e raised to the power minus sigma plus j omega t dt. Sigma must be a sufficiently strong cage. So what kind of, what kind of region of convergence do we have in general? The region of convergence in the S-plane always lies between two vertical lines, because the region of convergence has only to do with sigma, it does not depend on omega. So in general, the region of convergence of a Laplace transform is between two vertical lines. In S-plane. Now one of the vertical lines can be at infinity also. Here for example, the two vertical lines are sigma equal to 2 and sigma tends to plus infinity. Right? So one of those vertical lines could go to infinity also. So how do you take the inverse Laplace transform? You see, suppose capital X of S, as we write it, capital X of S is integral minus to plus infinity xt e raised to the power minus st dt, as we have written. This is the Laplace transform. So we call this the Laplace transform of xt. In the region of convergence. So a Laplace transform always has a region of convergence. The Laplace transform is not just an expression. Let us take the example of e raised to the power of. Are we assuming that? No, not necessary. So we will take an example of both, right? We will take an example of both. So here we have, in this case we have taken e raised to the power 2 tut. So let us find the Laplace transform. X of S is integral 0 to infinity e raised to the power 2t e raised to the power minus st dt. Let us evaluate this. So this will be equal to integral e raised to the power 2 minus st dt from 0 to infinity. This will converge only if the real part of 2 minus s is less than 0. That means the real part of s is greater than the real part of 2, which is 2. Okay. And if it converges, what is the integral? It's very easy to, if real part of s is greater than 2, then this integral becomes e raised to the power 2 minus st divided by 2 minus s, going from 0 to infinity, which at infinity it will go to 0 and at 0 it will be 1. So 1 by s minus 2. So Laplace transform, so many of us know this, right? The Laplace transform of e raised to the power 2 tut is 1 by s minus 2 in the region of convergence, real part of s greater than 2. Now let us understand why the region of convergence is so important. So Laplace transform is always associated with the region of convergence. You cannot separate the two things. Let us see why the region of convergence is so important. In fact, suppose we took, let's sketch the region of convergence here. So real part of S sigma equal to 2. So we have taken this region of convergence. Now suppose we were to invert the region of convergence. Suppose we consider real part of S less than 2. So suppose we take the region of convergence looking like this. To the left of sigma equal to 2, and you use the same expression. That means 1 by s minus 2. What would be the corresponding function? Let us see. So how could we come up with this function? Now, indeed, consider another yt or x tilde t given by e raised to the power of 2tu minus t. What is u minus t? U minus t is 1 for t less than or equal to 0 and 0 for t greater than 0. What is the Laplace transform of x tilde t? Minus infinity to 0 e raised to the power 2t e raised to the power minus st dt, which is minus infinity to 0 e raised to the power 2 minus s t dt. Now when will this converge? See, here the problem is that you are going to minus infinity. Now if you are going to minus infinity, then the real part of 2 minus s should be greater than 0. So we need real part of 2 minus s to be greater than 0, which means real part of s must be less than 2. That's the region we have seen. Is that right? So real part of s needs to be less than 2. And that means if real part of s is less than 2, then integral from minus infinity to 0 e raised to the power 2 minus s t dt becomes e raised to the power 2 minus s t divided by 2 minus s from minus infinity to 0, and this is 1 by 2 minus s minus 0, because when t tends to minus infinity with real part of 2 minus s greater than 0 as you have, it vanishes. So it's 1 by s minus 2, which is minus 1 by s minus 2. Okay? So now we know the inverse Laplace. You know the same expression. If you were to take, now it's very easy to see therefore that if you take minus x tilde t, that is minus e raised to the power 2tu minus t, it would have a Laplace transform (1 by s minus 2), but with the region of convergence, real part of s less than 2. So same expression, but with a change in region of convergence gives you a different function. The region of convergence is very central and very important. This should be understood. Yes.
Suppose
So,
The cage is so large.
huh.
It's the minus.
So, if you see that now, one thing about the region of convergence, the region of convergence cannot have what are called singularities in it. Now, for example, here 1 by s minus 2, the function 1 by s minus 2 diverges as s tends to 2. Is that right? 1 by s minus 2 has a pole, it has a singularity at s equal to 2. What is a singularity? A singularity is a point where the function cannot be defined, or the function is not convergent. So, region of convergence cannot include a singularity. Now, you do have examples of a region of convergence going all over the S plane. Suppose you take just a narrow pulse and find its Laplace transform. An impulse, an impulse is a pulse which becomes narrower and narrower and maintains unit area. So, if this pulse is at 0, now visualize. Suppose you take, in fact, that impulse is often called delta t. It's a pulse with ever narrowing area, with ever narrowing width, but maintaining unit area. If you take the Laplace transform of this impulse, what will happen? You can visualize. You see, you have a very narrow pulse around 0. It holds unit area. So, what will this pulse do? It will simply pick up the value of e raised to the power of minus st at t equal to 0. Everything else will get thrown away. And when you integrate, that area will simply come out. So, this will be equal to the value of e raised to the power of minus st at t equal to 0 is 1. So, 1 multiplied by 1, so 1. So, this is the Laplace transform. And where does this converge? This converges all over the S plane. There is no problem. So, the question is sine and cosine. Well, if you have a sine wave on one side, either on the positive side of t or on the negative side of t, it has a Laplace transform, but the region of convergence does not go all over the S plane. No. The region of convergence will be to the right of the imaginary axis or to the left of the imaginary axis, depending on whether you have a right sided. So, in fact, it is very simple. You see, if you look at it, there is a very simple principle here. E raised to the power of 2t ut looks like this. And e raised to the power of minus e raised to the power 2t u minus t looks like this. So, it starts from minus 1 and goes towards 0. So, this is a so-called right-sided signal, isn't it? And this is a so-called left-sided signal. Now, what kind of a Laplace transform, what kind of a region of convergence does this have? Like this. What kind of a region of convergence does this have? Like this. So, it is very interesting. There is a very simple way to remember. If a signal is right-sided, its region of convergence, the Laplace transform is also right-sided. If a signal is left-sided, then its region of convergence is also left-sided. Okay, that is a simple mnemonic. So, for a sinusoid, if you have a sine wave, and if you take and the sine wave lasts only on one side. So, if it lasts only to the right of t equal to 0, then you have a right-sided Laplace transform to the right of the imaginary axis. and if you have a left-sided sine wave which lasts only for t less than 0, then you have a left-sided Laplace transform against the left of the imaginary axis. Now let us look at why is the Laplace transform so useful. So one good thing about the Laplace transform is it again carries over the convolution property. So for linear shift invariant systems it's very good. So let us have a linear shift invariant system with impulse response ht. An input xt, an output yt. Now xt, ht, yt may or may not have a Fourier transform. We have seen that. It may be, if the system is unstable, it may not have a Fourier transform, it may not have a frequency. So then let us see if we can take recourse to the Laplace transform. So let us see if we can relate the output Laplace transform to the input Laplace transform and the Laplace transform of the impulse response, right. So y of t is of course integral from minus to plus infinity x tau ht. By the way, you can write x tau ht minus tau or h tau xt minus tau. Convolution is a commutative operation, one can prove that. So if you interchange the order of the arguments in convolution, the output is unchanged. So let us find the Laplace transform of yt. Let us use the same trick as we did yesterday. Let us again make a change of variable as we did yesterday. So let us put t minus tau equal to lambda as usual. So we make a change of variable from tau t to tau lambda. Now again we can use the argument of, if I want to change the element of integration, I should again use the principle of the Jacobian. So d tau d lambda can be related to d tau dt using the Jacobian or determinant of modulus of the determinant of this transformation. Is that correct? Now how much is the modulus of the determinant of this transformation? It is 1. Determinant of that matrix is 1. So therefore, d tau d lambda is the same as d tau dt. And moreover, when tau and t independently go from minus to plus infinity, tau and lambda will also go independently from minus to plus infinity. So therefore we get the Laplace transform of yt which is capital Y of S, is integral minus to plus infinity x tau h lambda e raised to the power minus s. Now t is lambda plus tau, d tau d lambda, and again we can use the same trick. We can take the tau term outside and the lambda terms inside. Now, what is this quantity? This is the Laplace transform of the impulse response, and it is independent of tau, so I can bring it outside. That's right, so I can bring it outside. And once I bring it outside, what do I have left inside? I have Hs integral minus to plus infinity x tau e raised to the power minus s tau d tau, which is the Laplace transform of x. Now, of course, in all this discussion, we have forgotten about the region of convergence. So, you need S to belong to the region of convergence of both of them actually, for this argument to be correct. There must be some intersection in the regions of convergence, and you can start with taking an S in the intersection of the two regions of convergence, if it is there. But assuming that you can find an S which is in the intersection, then this is correct. So, the Laplace transform of the output of a linear shift invariant system is the product of the Laplace transforms of the input and the impulse response. So, in fact, what is beautiful about this is that now the ratio Ys by Xs, so Xs into Hs is equal to Ys, whereupon Ys by Xs is equal to Hs. Okay, so this ratio is independent of the input. And that is called the system function. So, this is called the system, it is only dependent on the system, it is called system function. What is a system function? The system function is the Laplace transform of the impulse response. Of course, you must remember a system function always has an expression and a region of convergence. We tend to forget that. We tend to associate the expression with the system function. We forget it must also have a region of convergence. In fact, the region of convergence tells you about the stability and the causality of the system. Let me take an example. Suppose you have a linear shift invariant system with impulse response Ht is e raised to the power 2t ut. What is the system function? System function is the Laplace transform of this 1 by s minus 2, but with real part of s greater than 2. That is important. So, you must not forget the system function always has a region of convergence associated. In fact, now Suppose I were to take the same expression for the system function. I took another system which had the same expression for the system function but the opposite region of convergence. So now suppose we consider an LSI system. With system function. So we will take the system function first. 1 by s minus 2, but with region of convergence, real part of s is less than 2, not greater than 2. What would be the corresponding impulse response? You know that. Now, what is the corresponding impulse response? Minus e raised to the power 2t u of minus t. Now, let us ask the questions about causality and stability in these two systems. Let us take the first system. Impulse response ht equal to e raised to the power 2t ut. Is the system causal? Now, you can look at the impulse response and say, so is the system causal? Yes. Why is it causal? Because h of t is 0 for all t less than 0. H of t is 0 for negative t, as we saw. The necessary and sufficient condition for causality is that the impulse response should be 0 for t less than 0. So, this system is causal. Is the system stable? How do you know? How will you check? Yes? Yes, yeah, tell me. How will you check whether it's stable or not? Yeah, the absolute integral of the impulse response. Now, the absolute integral of the impulse response here is divergent. E raised to the power 2t dt for t greater than 0 diverges. It's a divergent integral. So, it's not absolutely integrable, and therefore, the system is not stable. Okay. However, now take this system. 1 by s minus 2 with region of convergence, real part of s less than 2. And the corresponding impulse response is minus e raised to the power of 2t u minus t. Is the system causal? No, because the impulse response is non-zero for t less than 0. The system is not causal. Is the system stable? Yes, because the impulse response is absolutely integrable. Not causal but stable. Is that right? So, therefore, the same expression for the Laplace transform with different regions of convergence changes the causality and stability. What does it teach you? It teaches you that the region of convergence is central to causality and stability. The Laplace transform. There is no concept of region of convergence in the Fourier transform. In fact, the Fourier transform exists only if the imaginary axis is in the region of convergence. Sigma equal to 0. If sigma equal to 0 is a part of the region of convergence, the Fourier transform exists, otherwise it does not exist. So, Fourier transform is a special case of the Laplace transform when the real part of s is equal to 0, and that should be included in the region of convergence for the Fourier transform to exist. Now, in fact, what is it about the region of convergence which tells you about causality and stability? So, you can see that the imaginary axis will play a big role in stability, because we saw that for stable systems, the impulse response definitely has a Fourier transform. Right? So, the imaginary axis is going to play a big role. In fact, without going into the full explanation, let me state the stability of a linear shift invariant system with system function. That means you are assuming that the system function is defined. It's a very simple test for stability. If the region of convergence has the imaginary axis, the system is stable. If the region of convergence does not have the imaginary axis, the system is unstable. Actually, I am sort of giving a not so accurate statement. This is actually true only for what are called rational systems. That means the Laplace transform should be rational. But anyway, for the moment I will leave it here. Now, similarly for causality also, we would look at the real part of S tending to plus infinity contour. So, again I am stating it without proof. So, what we call the rightmost contour, rightmost vertical line. Real part of S tending to plus infinity. So, if real part of S tends to plus infinity is included in the region of convergence, the system is causal. In fact, you can see from here also. In the first system, real part of S tending to plus infinity is included in the region of convergence. The second system, since real part of S is less than 2, real part of S tending to plus infinity is absent from the ROC, and therefore the system is not causal. Okay, so the Laplace transform is also useful in dealing with non-causal and or non-unstable systems. Now in the afternoon, and I know that many of you have also been exposed to Laplace transform. So in the afternoon we are going to just do the same thing that we did yesterday. Yeah, we are going to have 5 groups, the same 5 groups which you formed yesterday, and you are going to now this time we are going to start with group 5. They will come first, right? So they will first talk about their exercise yesterday, and then they'll talk about the exercise today. So now we'll assign tasks to each of the groups. I'll do that right away so that after the lunch you can discuss during lunch. And of course, this time you have to again take your job of introducing your friends very seriously. So, group 5 first. So, you have to again introduce your friends. This time also I'll ask some different person to introduce the whole group. Yes? So, group 5. Group 5 will have the task. What happens in the Laplace transform group 5 day 2. Please note it down. When we shift the signal, when we multiply the signal by e raised to the power alpha t. This is the task for group 5. Yeah. Is it okay? Shall I project it? Yes. Group 5 you noted. Group 4, we're going in the reverse order. So we go in the reverse order now. Group 4, day 2. And today we have enough time to do all the exercises, including the ones that were left out yesterday. Group 4 will say find the Laplace transform in the differential equation 2 times d2yt dt squared plus dyt dt plus yt is equal to xt. Now this is the system description. Find the system description. Find the system function. So what happens? What happens when you differentiate? What happens to Laplace transform when you differentiate? You have to explain, also interpret it. You have to interpret what happens to Laplace transform when you differentiate. You have to interpret that. Right? See now, in fact, the hint here is first write an expression for the inverse Laplace transform for group 4 itself. So I have already given you a hint today. How do you find the inverse Laplace transform? You first take the inverse Fourier transform and then remove the cage. Isn't it? So use that to find the inverse Laplace transform. Of course, we don't often use that to find the inverse Laplace transform. We evaluate the inverse Laplace transform by experience, by inspection. Group 3. You have this RC circuit. With resistance and capacitance, RC. So group 4 would have already solved their example, then you can use that. No? Now suppose we give this system the input. So the input is given here and the output is taken here, isn't it? The input is the voltage here and the output is the voltage here. So suppose RC is equal to 1 unit and suppose xt is equal to e raised to the power minus 2t ut. find yt using the Laplace transform. Also, find the system function of this system. That's a part of this exercise. Okay, group 3. All right, you have noted down. Group 4, group 2. All these are group 3, day 2. Group 2. Given the Laplace transform expression, one by s plus 2 into 1 by s minus 2. Find the inverse Laplace transform in 3 different regions of convergence. Real part of s greater than 2, real part of s less than minus 2, and real part of s between 2 and minus 2. Okay, so this is the exercise for group 2, day 2. Is that okay? Group 2 and group 1. Group 1. Prove so xf is the Fourier transform of xt and yf is the Fourier transform of yt. Now, and interpret now this is called the Parseval theorem. Parseval's theorem. So you have to prove it and you have to interpret it also. Is that right? So all of you should eat 2 or 3 chapatis more because there's so much of work to do. Or you can eat some more rice or both. Is that fine? So we'll meet after lunch and we'll do these exercises.